Welcome. My name's Jen Farmer. I'm the CEO at the Friedreich Ataxia Research Alliance and excited to welcome you all to our webinar today with Matt Klein, who is the CEO of PTC Therapeutics. Matt and I decided when we were setting up this webinar to make it more conversational. So we want to be able to kind of talk through updates in terms of the Vatiquinone program. So Matt will give us a little bit of an overview of what Vatiquinone is, the studies that have been done, and PTC's recent announcement about an NDA filing with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and we'll talk about what that is and what that means. We will allow time for all of you to submit questions. So if you've got a question, there's a Q&A box that should be at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can open that up and you can type in your questions. My colleague, Kellen Madden, who is FARA's Patient Engagement Manager, will be helping moderate the Q&A. So if you see a question in there that was the question that you were going to ask, you can also kind of give it a thumbs up, and that'll help upvote it so that we see the most common questions at the top of the queue. And let's see, with that, I will quickly introduce Matt. Matt is a physician and CEO of PTC Therapeutics, and Matt has been working on Vatiquinone for many years, not only at PTC, but also formerly at BioElectron. And so Matt is the best person to kind of explain to us what the drug is and what studies have been done, what we know about it, and answer the questions that you have. So Matt, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Jen, thank you so much. And it's so great to be here and really so exciting to be able to be here to share that we have, after many years of work and collaboration with the community, submitted an approval application for Vatiquinone in the United States for children and adults. So it's an incredibly exciting milestone for us, many of us who've been working on this program for a long time. And if approved, would Vatiquinone be the first ever approved therapy for children with Friedreich ataxia and adolescents with Friedreich ataxia, and then of course also be a potential additional therapy for adults. So that would be an incredible milestone for the community. So I think now, starting with today, now going backwards, it's been a long journey for sure. I think it's one that started really over a decade and a half ago, maybe even a little longer. And it was about a collaboration that started between a small company that had a lot of understanding of energy in cells and a collaboration with FARA to say, can we use our scientific expertise and knowledge to bring a drug to patients with children and adults living with FA. And like anything else, if you're going to do something really challenging, it's going to take a bit of time, and there's going to be a lot of important learnings along the way, and there have been. I think the first Vatiquinone, which many of you may have known it by its former name of EPI-743, probably the first individual with Friedreich ataxia treated with EPI-743 was probably 15 years ago. And those were the early days when we were studying the drug and trying to understand exactly how it works, and also how to develop a drug to get approved for Friedreich ataxia, because at the time there were no approvals. There had been very few clinical trials ever done, and that set of learnings takes time. So we had done an initial compassionate use study, which gave us a number of important learnings about the drug, not only in individuals with Friedreich ataxia, but other mitochondrial disease. It gave early clues how the drug might be working and how we could best develop it. We then did the first.
Matt, can you give us a few sentences and description on how does the drug work? What is Vatiquinone, and why did we think it might be a good therapy for Friedreich's ataxia specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think everyone knows that Friedreich's ataxia is a disease that results in problems with mitochondria, which is the part of your cell that makes energy, and that Friedreich ataxia is also associated with a lot of inflammation and stress of cells. And what the work we were doing and the way vatiquinone works is targets a very important pathway within the cells in your body to decrease the effects of Friedreich ataxia. That is, decrease stress, decrease inflammation, and allow there to be more energy function in the cell. So when you put together what Friedreich ataxia is and how the drug works, it was logical that you would look, if you have a drug that's targeting problems with energy, to develop it for a disease of energy. Made a lot of sense. And of course, as time went on, we learned a little bit more on the science of exactly what was going on. We now refer to that pathway as something called ferroptosis, which is kind of a big name to basically say it's a pathway about cell inflammation, cell stress, some iron, and cells being injured and dying. And again, of course, if you want to think about Friedreich ataxia and frataxin, it has a lot to do with iron, inflammation, cell stress, and energy. And so as we went on and learned more exactly how vatiquinone was working, it made all the sense in the world that this be a drug that we try to develop for individuals with Friedreich ataxia.
So vatiquinone, if I were to summarize, vatiquinone is helping the FAs, the cells, the FA cells produce more energy, more ATP in the mitochondria. And it is helping to kind of reverse or tampen down the effects of mitochondrial dysfunction that are caused by Friedreich's ataxia. And
Uh,
that's work that's been done in cells from patients, like that's been studied in the lab in terms of, patients give blood samples, they give skin
yep.
samples so that we have cell models from patients. And those are things that, we've been able, or PTC's been able to test. And I think other FA investigators as well. There are several publications in the scientific literature that, review that, in these cell models, we can see this kind of effect of the drug.
Absolutely. The first thing we thought the drug was doing is decreasing those harmful effects of having a frataxin mutation and having Friedreich's ataxia, right? That inflammation, that stress. And then by treating that, it allows the cell to function better, have more energy. And the first way we understood this was from cells from patients. That's exactly right. It was in a laboratory. It was through, again, the help of patients willing to volunteer to help us learn more and develop drugs. So what we were able to demonstrate was that we were in fact doing all of those things, decreasing all the bad things that come from the injuries to cell and mitochondrial problems, and also helping the mitochondria work better.
Thank you. So kind of knowing now how vatiquinone works, why we think it could be beneficial in FA, you try and translate that, right, then to clinical studies in people. And there have been several clinical trials of what was, Epi 743, now we call vatiquinone. Can you kind of review some of those clinical trials and kind of what the key learnings have been? And, let's also make sure we review for everyone the most recent study, the MOVE-FA study, as that's, the critical study related to trying to advance the drug towards an approval.
Yep. So as I mentioned, the first treatments we did was with a few individuals with Friedreich ataxia in what's called compassionate use. That was before we started doing clinical trials in the very early days. And by early, I mean 2010, 2011, and the first parts of 2012. And then in 2012, we did a first clinical trial with vatiquinone in adult individuals with FA that were ambulatory and those that were wheelchair dependent. And this was a 6-month study, so a short study where we made some important observations in terms of the drug showing benefit at relative to placebo on the FARA scale. We also learned importantly that the drug was safe and well tolerated. And we had also learned from previous studies, the compassionate use studies, also at this point, that the drug was safe in children and adults. We also learned that 6 months was probably too short to get the definitive evidence to prove that the drug was effective enough to be approved. How did we know that? Placebo for 6 months, but then additional 18 months where everyone who was in the trial was able to continue on drug. And what we saw after 24 months was a very strong benefit relative to natural history. Over 2 years overall, individuals who received vatiquinone actually had an improvement from where they started. Whereas, of course, in the natural history comparison group, over 2 years, we saw the typical progression on the FARS score that we see. So as we left that study, we said, okay, we made some really important learnings here. The drug's safe and well tolerated. The drug is showing a benefit in slowing progression, probably seen better over the longer term because 6 months for a placebo-controlled trial in a disease like FA is probably too short for a number of reasons. Interesting, it was based on that important learning that the next study of OMAV occurred, and that decision was made to go 12 months. And I think the community learned that that was a really good idea, because if they had stopped it after 6 months, they wouldn't have had the signal that would have allowed for the approval. So I think that was an example of us all learning over time and how one trial can lead to really important learnings for future trials. We made a number of other learnings that then came forward as we moved towards the MOVE-FA trial, and a lot had changed at BioElectron at the time. But importantly, BioElectron became part of PTC in 2019. And the first priority when BioElectron became part of PTC was to make sure we started the MOVE-FA trial, because we very much wanted to put to work all the learnings that we had made. One, that a longer trial would be really important. The second is that we also wanted to include younger individuals. We have experience with vatiquinone in children under 1 year of age. And we said, okay, why don't we do a study that included a lot of younger patients, including we got down to 6 or 7 years old, but also some adults, because again, we realized that vatiquinone, because of the way it works, can have benefit for all individuals with FA, no matter what age they're at. And so that led to the MOVE-FA study, which just as we started, COVID occurred, but we said, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep going and be able to do the trial through COVID. And after the 72 weeks, we did the study in the US and all around the world. We had some very important good results, including showing a significant effect on the upright stability scale, which is an important part of the FARS scale, and what has now been learned is the most important part of that scale for younger individuals, just because of the way the disease progresses and the scale works. And that we had a significant value for those who are into statistics. The p-value was 0.021, and that translated to about a 42% slowing of progression on upright stability over 72 weeks, which also could translate into a several-month delay in the risk of losing the ability to walk, which is again based on some of the work that the Friedreich ataxia researchers have done. We also had a significant benefit on fatigue. This was an important part of the study. We wanted to understand the effects of fatigue, because we know that for individuals with Friedreich ataxia, fatigue can be the most significant symptom of disease. So being able to understand if we were having a favorable effect on fatigue, which we thought was a really important thing. And we also showed benefit on the 1-minute walk. So in upright stability, we see that we're affecting things that could impact someone's ability to walk. And then we measured it directly. We saw a direct benefit in terms of walking ability for those who received vatiquinone relative to the individuals who received placebo.
So Matt, I'm gonna ask you to pause over there. I'm gonna try and maybe recap a little and ask a few more follow-on questions, because you touched a lot of important points there. You know, the first clinical trials, you know, being so valuable in terms of understanding safety, as well as potential benefit, and then, you know, trial design. And that, you know, I'm glad you raised that, you know, the FA field in general has learned a lot from prior clinical trials. And we've learned that in FA, we have to conduct trials for at least 1 year, especially, if we want to see change in neurologic function over a period of time. There's a placebo effect that can occur in trials, and that's part of why we need that 1 year time frame, as well as, just the overall rate at which FA progresses. We also learned, I think, from that study, you mentioned that first study included both ambulatory and non-ambulatory people. And for some of our endpoints, we need to have a more homogeneous cohort of individuals when we're using certain endpoints, to make sure we're measuring the same thing, right? In people,
Yeah.
all the people who are in the trial. It becomes much harder to have statistical significance in a trial if you're measuring different things in different people, which makes sense. But these are all learnings that came for all of us, I think, as we've learned how to conduct better trials in Friedreich's ataxia. But you also made another really important point that, um, you know, PTC considered was the opportunity to do the MOVE FA study in children. And this is, it's been really important for FARA over the last few years to advance pediatric clinical trials, because we know, treating individuals as early as possible in the course of their disease will hopefully give them the biggest long-term benefit. And so obviously want to be able to start to have treatments in children. Um, and you mentioned that, in this case, vatiquinone could be, we could do a trial in children because I think you said you had data in children. And so I just wanted to ask if you could help our community understand, because there are some drugs that we can study in kids right now and some we can't.
Yeah.
And but I think in this case, there was data on vatiquinone in children with other mitochondrial disorders. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the story, so all that is correct. I think the story of vatiquinone is a little bit unique in that it initially was a drug that was studied and developed for children. Most drugs start in adults because the path to be able to study a drug in an adult is a little bit quicker than getting the ability to study a drug in children. There's a lot of additional testing that has to be done. And I think regulatory authorities are understandably protective of children and want to make as much as everyone realizes that, as you said, for a disease like Friedreich ataxia, that you're born with the genetics of, the sooner we treat, the better. If we're going to slow progression in a disease, so let's start slowing that progression as soon as possible and buy as much time as possible with as much function as possible. But there's also safety first, right? Everyone wants to make sure that in treating younger patients who may be more vulnerable to a drug side effect, that we're sure that the drug is safe. And so what we did with vatiquinone was unique because we went to children first. The first patients treated with vatiquinone were 3 years old. And we have as many patients we've treated with different diseases and children as, more children than adults who've been treated. And so that when it came time to be able to say, okay, let's do the MOVE FA study, and we would like to study the drug in children because we believe that we have an important effect on slowing disease progression, and we want to start treatment as early as possible. We had a lot of safety data, including data of children who've been on the drug for 10 years straight
And those are
and
children
longer.
with other
In fact, the
mitochondrial
longest.
disorders, not necessarily children with FA, right?
Exactly
Yeah.
right. Exactly right. The other mitochondrial disorders, in fact, the longest treated patient is a boy who's been on vatiquinone for almost 16 years now, and with another mitochondrial disease. But again, having those data that show a large experience in related diseases where individuals can be very ill, and showing safety there gave a lot of comfort that we could then study vatiquinone in a trial with children with
Yep.
Friedreich ataxia.
And so you said MOVE FA was the phase 3 pivotal study that PTC launched several years ago in FA, and these were in children and adults, right, ages 7 and older. You mentioned that it was a randomized placebo-controlled trial, US as well as ex-US sites, I believe sites in Canada and Europe and South America. Um, and I think there were over 120, almost 130 people enrolled. Is that correct?
About 140 altogether. Yeah.
Um, and the, when the 72-week randomized placebo-controlled trial portion was over, that's the results you were summarizing for us, the improvement in upright stability, the improvement in fatigue, and the 1-minute walk were the primary outcomes, the positive data of the MOVE FA trial.
That's correct. And we did have other things that were positive too. I think everything, all the measurements we had, the overall F.A.S scale, activities of daily living, all of those showed benefit on vatiquinone relative to placebo. But the ones that you pointed out were the ones that were the strongest data pieces that we used in our discussions with FDA to support agreement to submit the approval application.
And after that 72-week time period where the study was blinded and randomized with people on placebo and active, everybody rolled over into an open label extension or was offered the opportunity to enroll into an open label extension study, right?
Absolutely, and that's always something we try to do in all of our clinical studies. And we also know that again, if we're having a benefit, then of course we want to be able to continue treatment. And so we continued to treat any participant who wanted to stay in the study, and everyone then received vatiquinone. And we did another analysis that we recently completed that FDA asked us to do to include in the new drug approval application. And that was to ask the question, what happens over a longer period of time? What was the outcome for individuals who started on vatiquinone and were on treatment for 3 years? So we went ahead and studied those who started on vatiquinone and said, okay, where are you at 3 years? And what's your progression like compared to the natural history of disease? So again, we used the F.A.C.S registry, which I think is now well understood to be, probably one of the most significant and valuable natural history registries in all of rare disease. In fact, I was at a FDA meeting last week, and someone at a panel raised the F.A.C.S as an example of a reliable registry that can be used for regulatory approvals. So that's so important to have that. And this is just another example of how the community has given of themselves to help try to get drugs forward. And so we did the analysis. We compared 3 years on vatiquinone with a natural history group, and again, as we did in the earlier study, showed that over time, vatiquinone continues to provide a really important benefit in slowing disease progression. And so after 3 years, there was 50% less disease progression in those who received vatiquinone compared to natural history. And
And that was based on the mFARS exam?
Exactly, the mFARS exam, and that was a p-value of less than 0.0001. So highly significant and really important finding in terms of understanding the effect long-term on disease progression with vatiquinone.
So just in case somebody's joining us and they're new to the community, the mFARS, the Modified Friedreich Ataxia Rating Scale, measures, it contains sort of 4 different domains, and one measures speech and what we call bulbar function, so speech and coughing ability. And then there's upper limb coordination tasks in the second part. The third part is lower limb coordination tasks. And then the last part's upright stability, which Matt, you talked about also in relation to the MOVE FA, that you've analyzed the mFARS as a whole, but you've also pulled out that upright stability as its own assessment, because that is the part of the scale that changes the most in children with FA, and is the most sensitive to capturing change in the pediatric or in very young children. And obviously, as folks are in the study for multiple years now, they're getting older. And so many of them are transitioning from being adolescents and teens now to young adults. And so, that mFARS is important because that scale then becomes more relevant, as people age and progress in their FA. So it becomes more informative, you know, it, as people get a little older, and it's why we assess multiple different things in the context of these trials, especially when trials go on for such a long period of time.
I think this is another example of an important learning that we've made over time, right? I think initially, if we go back 7 or 8 years or 9 years, it was a fight just to get FDA to believe in the mFARS as an endpoint for clinical trials. And then we learned that the beauty, what we always loved the mFARS as an endpoint because it was capable of assessing different aspects of the disease that we know individuals may have. Then we learned that at different times in an individual's life and disease progression, you look to different parts of the scale. So as you said, for younger individuals at those early stages of the disease, upright stability is where you can capture changes over time. And then, of course, as time gets further and further, we can see changes in other parts of the disease. And when we think about doing clinical trials and proving that a drug is effective, clearly the most important thing is that we're looking at the part of the scale that's changing so we know if we're slowing the change.
And you mentioned now the open label extension, you've analyzed data from that and compared people in the open label extension to natural history control data that we have and we share with the wider FA community. That open label extension is still ongoing, right? You're still collecting data from that, even though you've analyzed some of it. It's still an ongoing study, and we're still getting data from it. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Very valuable data. And we've also had changes recently to the protocol to allow individuals after a certain point, if they're of the appropriate age, that they can also uh, receive Skyclarys if they're above 16.
And there was another piece of the MOVE FA study that I just wanted to a- ask about or ask you to summarize. There was a smaller study for individuals with FA under 7 years old, because the clinical trial covered or enrolled individuals 7 years and older. But there was a smaller study. And could you just give our community a little bit of an overview about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Move FA, we tried to pick an age range that we thought would give us the best chance of proving that the drug had strong effect over the period of 72 weeks. As we said, one of the benefits of vatiquinone is that we have experience in treating individuals with other mitochondrial diseases who are much younger. And that the drug has demonstrated to be safe, and we have evidence that the drug can be effective in younger individuals. And therefore, we initiated a smaller study of younger children with vatiquinone. It was outside of the MOVE-FA study, but we conducted it. And the questions we asked there were really understanding safety and also levels of the drug in the blood, since we want to make sure that we're giving a dose that's safe and should be effective. It's very hard, just given the ability of very young children to measure mFARS. The mFARS exam is not great for younger children, so that's why that wasn't a focus of that study. And not surprisingly, we're continuing to see in those younger children safety as we have before, and drug levels that we believe are the right levels that they should be to have the same effects we're seeing in older children and adults.
Great, thank you. So um, just to I want to move on to kind of where we are today with, vatiquinone. And so you mentioned that the data from the MOVE FA clinical trial and the open label extension data were data that have allowed PTC to submit a new drug application or an NDA to the FDA. So can you kind of help the community understand, like, what does that mean, submitting an NDA, and kind of
Yeah.
what happens? I imagine you put together this huge application, you kind of hit the send button or, submit all the documents. But if you can talk us through that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so every country has a drug approval process, and it starts with getting an agreement, usually from the regulatory agency. So in the US, that's the FDA, that this is what the package should look like. If you include these data, these are the kinds of data we would need to see to determine whether the drug can be approved. And then we put together an approval application, which is probably the largest application you could ever imagine. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages with everything you could imagine about the drug, the clinical trial results, safety data, animal studies, how we manufacture the drug. All those things go into FDA. Yep, you hit a send button and in several hours it gets sent, and then you see a spinning clock for a while, and then it goes through. And then the FDA looks at it. And what the FDA says is, okay, we want to look at every piece of this application to make sure all the right parts are here so that we can then do a deeper review and determine if we're going to approve the drug. That first period takes about 60 days. It takes them about 60 days to go through all the parts of the application. Did you present the data in the right format? Are the checkboxes at the right place? Are all those things? And then at that point, they'll say, yes, this is an application that we're going to accept to review, or we're not going to review it either because there's too many errors in the file, or we just don't that it's something that we could ever approve, so we're not going to take the resources to review it. So we're in that first 60-day period now. It's our expectation that in February, late February, we'll hear from FDA that they've decided to accept the application, and then they will go through a period where they'll review every detail of it to determine if they're going to approve the drug.
So end of February, we can expect to hear PTC will make an announcement, that the FDA has concluded this initial review period and
Yes.
hopefully tell us that, yes, we'll now go forward. I guess they say it's accepting the NDA for review. Is that the
Yeah.
formal
The
terminology?
formal terminology is filing it.
Filing.
They file the NDA, but that sounds so negative. But yeah, so that's why we use the term accepting. So yeah, they make the decision that we're going to give this the full review, which they'll either do on a fast track or a regular track. And
That was my next question is, so when the review process officially starts sometime late February, there's a fast track review or a regular track standard review.
Yeah.
And can you kind of give us what those timeframes are? And will we know at the end of February what type of review?
Yeah, we should know by when they accept it for review, they'll usually tell you we're going to do this on a fast track or the regular standard track. The regular standard track from that date in February is 10 months. And this fast track is 6 months. So it is indeed faster. And our hope is that it'll be done on a fast track, particularly since this would be the first drug for children with FA. And we know FDA realizes that there's a need, that there is no approved therapy for individuals under the age of 16, and that's a big deal. So our hope is that they realize that need is there, and therefore, if everything we said that treating a degenerative disease or a progressive disease like FA sooner is better, that getting an approved drug to patients sooner would be better. So that's sort of our thinking of why it could be a fast track.
Thank you for that. I know we've got also some questions kind of coming in from the community. And so I'm going to ask Kellen if maybe she can help us out with bringing some of those questions to the front.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. We're going to try to get through as many as we can. I think some of the questions I've seen the most of so far are some of them are talking about like what does the drug actually do? The upright stability score was mentioned, so we have some questions on, does that mean that this drug won't help people who no longer can walk? And we also have a question about, do you know anything about whether the drug might slow progression, or will it stop progression, or will it improve symptoms?
Yeah. All really good questions. So I think let me emphasize one point that can be a little bit confusing that with the mFARS exam and upright stability and other parts. This idea that based on where an individual is in his or her disease progression is sort of where you can look to understand if a drug is going to have benefit. And so what we've learned is that earlier stages of disease, particularly children, the part of the mFARS where you're going to be able to see the benefit is upright stability. And the reason for that is that the part of the mFARS that's changing in the early part of disease, and by change, I mean where you can see progression, is upright stability. Therefore, if you want to understand if a drug is going to slow progression, the way to understand that a drug is going to slow progression is to look at the part of the scale where an individual is progressing. And I think that makes a lot of sense. That doesn't mean that the drug won't work if you're in a different stage of disease. It just means we have to look to other parts of the mFARS to understand that. And that's why the long-term extension data that Jen and I were talking about is so important. What we saw is while there was a significant benefit with vatiquinone on the upright stability over 72 weeks in the MOVE-FA study, when we started looking at individuals after 96 weeks, after 2 years, and out to 3 years, we start seeing that benefit coming through very clear on other parts of the mFARS, like upper limb and lower limb. And when we go back in time to that earlier study I mentioned done in 2012, 2013, and 2014, when we look at a population of all adults, both those who are still able to ambulate and those who are in a wheelchair, we see again benefit, and we see slowing over 24 months. And where we're seeing that is the part of the scale that we know is the most relevant at that stage of disease, which is on the upper limb and to some extent on the lower limb. So the good news here is that we're seeing a benefit with vatiquinone on every part of the mFARS. Just the part that we look at depends on where an individual is in his or her progression. So for kids, early stage, we're seeing it on upright stability, and over time at different stages of and different stages of the disease, we're seeing it on lower limb and then on upper limb, which is what gives us confidence that we believe vatiquinone could be a safe and effective therapy for all individuals with FA, regardless of where one may be in the disease process.
Thank you. And a similar question we got about what the drug is actually doing. Do you know anything, or did you collect any data about how the drug might impact cardiomyopathy in FA?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's something we did not study in the MOVE-FA study. And that, again, was a little bit of a learning from our earlier study, where years ago we studied so many things that it was very hard to know exactly where we were having an effect. And so for this study, and particularly being in the earlier stage individuals, we decided to focus on mFARS exam and fatigue and ambulation, and not look at the heart specifically.
Thank you. All right, I think we might move towards some of the questions that are focused on what happens if the drug is approved and it was submitted to the FDA. So that means if it's approved, that would be in the US. So we do have some questions about what approval might look like for other countries. And the two that were mentioned specifically were Canada and India.
Yeah. So we have spent a lot of time talking about the US and the FDA, but we will always look, as we've done with some of the other drugs PTC has. We look at any place in the world we think we could help individuals. So for sure, there'll be other approval applications that we're working on right now that will update as time goes on. There's also a number of countries that, with a US approval from the FDA, can make it a lot easier to get approved in a different country. So we're just working through the sequence and coordination right now. We're obviously incredibly proud to have gotten the NDA into the FDA. We're incredibly excited about the opportunity of having the first ever approved therapy for children. But we realize that FA is not a U.S. only disease, and so we very much looking forward to trying to make the drug available in countries around the world.
Matt, I think that's you kind of brushed on a really significant point that maybe people don't know, but PTC is a company that has other drugs approved and has gotten approvals in other countries, correct? And rare disease as well. So you've kind of got a experience and footprint with some of these activities that need to come forward for additional global approvals, maybe
Yeah.
helpful for folks.
Yeah, so PTC has, since we've started now 27 years ago, has always been a rare disease company focused in rare disorders. We've done a lot of work in Duchenne muscular dystrophy and a number of other diseases as well. We currently sell drugs in over 50 different countries. So we have operations in countries all around the world, all rare diseases. And so, one of the things we pride ourselves on is our ability to try to get drugs to individuals who need them all over the world.
So I think continuing to ask questions about what might happen if the drug is approved, and this is the question that has been asked the most times. What do you know about the combination, if anything, about the combination of Skyclarys or omaveloxolone and vatiquinone? And specifically, is there any concern that you would need data that shows the benefit of taking them together to get insurance approval for both drugs?
Yeah, so there's a lot there, and we've gotten that question a lot. Of course, one of the things that we always talk about is for individuals under the age of 16, this would be the first and the only, which is really, really, really important. We also understand that there's people who are over the age of 16 who may be on Skyclarys or thinking about wanting to add a second therapy, because I think Jen and Ron, as long as I've known them, and it's been a long time, and I'm excited to, really proud to say that I've always talked about this being, FA is such a complicated drug, it's going to take a lot of different therapies. And so if we can have two therapies that can work together to give individuals a better effect on slowing down the disease, that would be so, so important. And that's why one of the reasons we've allowed in the long-term extension of MOVE-FA, those individuals who would qualify for Skyclarys and are interested in their physicians think there could be a benefit to allowing both drugs, because that's going to give us some early indication, certainly of safety. Now, from just looking at the drugs and what we understand about them, we don't see a reason why they couldn't both be taken, right? So the first thing always we think of is safety. Is there a reason to think there's a safety issue? Is there a reason we think one could impact the other and how it works in a negative way? And the answer is no, but we'll now be able to collect some data that speak to that. In terms of what insurance companies want, first of all, I know that's an incredibly important question because that's the world we live in. I know that. It's just hard to have an answer because it's hard to know. I think the answer is probably going to be, it's going to depend on the individual, the insurance company, and the physician. But these are all things that we know are important questions, and we're going to continue to look at, because the goal here is to make sure that any individual who can benefit from vatiquinone has the opportunity to try it.
Matt, maybe as a follow-on to one question came to my mind, in your experience with Duchenne and some of the other rare diseases where there are multiple approved therapies, is it kind of, do we have learnings there that kind of help us?
We do. I think certainly in Duchenne, I think it's well appreciated that individuals will be on corticosteroid therapy, as well as something that would target a genetic specific effect. And another disease area, spinal muscular atrophy, I think is another example where The first drugs, first there was a drug called Spinraza, which was an ASO that's given through a shot in the back. Then a gene therapy came along, Zolgensma, and then a therapy that PTC discovered and helped develop with Roche called Evrysdi, which is a pill. And we know that there's patients who've been on both who sometimes go back and forth to one and the other, those who've got gene therapy, but also get Evrysdi. So there are some precedents out there. And I think this is a really important area because, again, if we know FA is a complicated disease that is going to require multiple therapies, then we're going to want to make sure that individuals can get access to multiple therapies. I mean, that's the key.
Think maybe to go back to the beginning of the conversation about what is vatiquinone. We have some questions about how does someone take vatiquinone? Is it a pill? Is it an injection?
It's a capsule. So for kids 6 to 7 years and older, adults, it's a capsule. We do have another form of vatiquinone because I mentioned that we started in early days treating very young children. Clearly, very young children don't take capsules. So we have a liquid form. And that's something that we would use for very young children. Now, to be clear, the approval that we've sent into FDA is for the capsule form only, but we have the ability in the future to get that approval extended to the liquid form as well, which I know one of the other things that we've thought about for years is could there ever be newborn screening or even driving diagnosis earlier and earlier and earlier, which is something we've done a lot of work on in the Duchenne community. And of course, once you have a treatment that an individual is 2 or 3 or 4 years old can take, it would be, again, stop aggression as soon as you can. It would be great to increase diagnosis at that age group, and we do have a form of the drug that would be appropriate for younger children.
Helen, do you have another question? I'm trying to
Yes.
look through as well.
Yeah, sorry for the pause. We're just trying to organize the questions in the way that makes the most sense, but there's a lot and they're all good questions, so that could be a little bit hard. I think we've gotten a couple questions about any safety issues or side effects that might have been seen in the trials for vatiquinone.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've emphasized overall is that over the many years that we've been developing vatiquinone for a number of different diseases, we continue to see that it's safe and it's well tolerated. So we're not seeing serious side effects related to the drug. We naturally, like every drug in the world, there's certain things that we see that come up, like when people take medications, like sometimes it could be a GI, intestinal issue, stomach ache, nausea, those kinds of things, but we're seeing it in relatively reasonable numbers, so nothing that we are concerned is a significant safety and tolerability effect. And of course, that's one of the important things that the FDA does as well in their review, is they make sure that if there's any possible side effects that we would make sure that we share that. But again, I think one of the things that has given us confidence over time is how well vatiquinone has been safe and tolerated in the youngest patients, even those with very severe diseases other than Friedreich ataxia.
And we did actually have a different question specifically about the youngest patients who've been in the trials. Were those trials only looking at safety data, which, as you just said, the drug seems like it's safe based on those trials? Or were the trials in younger children also looking at efficacy? So do you have any sense of if the drug will be effective at slowing FA in the younger children?
Yep. So we have looked at a number of different diseases, because of course, when you start talking about mitochondrial dysfunction, there's a lot of diseases that have mitochondrial dysfunction. And so we've seen over time different effects in different individuals based on their disease. We've seen, in some cases, improvement of ambulatory function, other neuromuscular function. In some cases, we've seen vision benefits. Other cases, we've seen benefits in reducing seizures. So depending on the disease, we've seen different types of benefits. So I think we have confidence based on the safety tolerability of vatiquinone in younger patients, and what we've seen in older children with Friedreich ataxia, that we could have a benefit in younger children with Friedreich ataxia.
Yeah, maybe I can add to this and just say that it's really hard for us currently to measure disease progression in very young children diagnosed with FA. And when I say very young children, I mean children under the age of 7 or 8. And we believe that that's because kind of two things are happening. One is children are still acquiring neurological abilities and skills during, their early childhood. Even if they have FA, they're still, getting better at both gross and fine motor skills. Yet at the same time, they are experiencing FA and maybe they don't then develop the skills as quickly or as fully. But we don't have the right tools to assess neurologic function in young kids with FA. And it's been a research interest of FARA's and of our Natural History Consortium to try and find better, more sensitive measures that can be used in those younger kids so we can answer these questions. We just don't have the tool yet.
And Matt, with that in mind, do you have a sense of what the age range for approval would be if the drug is approved?
We have requested approval for ages 6 and above. That being the age group that we believe could take the capsule, as well as being consistent with the data in the trial. But of course, as we talked about, we are in a position to discuss with the FDA the ability of going even younger.
Helen, maybe I know we're coming up on almost an hour, so and Matt's been super generous with his time with us today. Maybe if there's like 1 or 2 more questions to kind of wrap us up, or I can wrap us up after if you've got 1 or 2 more questions you haven't hit yet.
Oh, that's a lot of pressure to pick the last few questions. Um,
I see one question that maybe I'll ask because I think it might have a quick answer, which is, we talked about the FDA review process and the time that it takes for FDA to review the drug. Um, you know, when does the drug actually then become available for people?
It could be right after approval. So if we were on the short track, that mean we could have an approval decision as soon as late August of 2025. And so we could have the drug available in the United States shortly thereafter. If it's the longer track, then we're talking about December. But again, that's what makes us so excited, right? The idea that we're sitting here in late January and we could have a first approved therapy for kids with FA in 7+ months, which would be incredibly exciting.
Yeah. And so PTC is doing all the necessary work to kind of plan for success and try and minimize any delay from when approval would happen to when people could actually try and access it through prescriptions from their providers and things like that.
Exactly. And this is the benefit, a little bit of our experience, right? Our teams have a lot of experience working with insurance companies and authorizations and physicians and manufacturers, all those things that we need to do from day of approval to, Dr. Lynch, Dr. Zezowitz, whoever your doctor is, and Dr. Prague writing a prescription and getting the drug, and how do we put all those things in motion? And we'll be continuing. I think I alluded to it briefly, but I'm incredibly proud, and PTC is incredibly proud to have the collaboration with FARA and the FA community is so strong and so impressive, and it's really an honor for us to be able to be doing our best to bring a therapy to all individuals with FA, and we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to be involved and understand how we can meet the needs of individuals as we move closer to a potential launch.
Yeah, and I think that's, this is a first conversation of the year. I imagine, as we move along through the year and start to understand the timeline for the review process and, next steps, we can have these kinds of community conversations again in the future and updates to the community to keep everyone informed.
Yeah, absolutely. And what an individual can do, right, to get their physician's attention, and we can work, as well to try to, just let people understand how the process works.
All right, Kellen, one last question.
All right. Can you talk a little bit more perhaps about what was measured with fatigue in the MOVE-FA trial? That's a symptom that I think a lot of people with FA are really impacted by. So it's pretty exciting that there might be a drug coming up that could address that.
Yeah, and this was something we remembered back was in 2017, the externally led patient-focused drug development day with FDA, and hearing from all of you, the community, that fatigue was the #1 symptom. It would be great to try to address with the therapy, and we believe just over the years, hearing the response of those who receive Vatiquinone, that fatigue could be something we help. So we wanted to make sure that we studied it. We used something called the Modified Fatigue Impact Scale, which is something that we looked at and we thought, and I think, Jen, we spoke with you and spoke with others, that this could be something relevant to understanding fatigue in individuals with FA. And we had a really nice, after 72 weeks, a significant effect on that part of the scale. And we've also heard from individuals and families that they feel that there's an effect on fatigue, and those who've even gone off the drug for one reason or another say, "Oh my goodness, that benefit I think has gone away." So that gives us a little more confidence, in addition to the data, which are strong, that this is something that we can potentially have a benefit for.
Great. Well, Helen, thank you for your help moderating a busy Q&A. Thank you all for attending today, the webinar, and submitting so many great questions and comments. We will work with PTC to continue to communicate new information as it becomes available through the FDA's review process, and look forward to also, we've got 3 research receptions that are regional this year, one in Phoenix, one in Oklahoma City, one that's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then there's also our research symposiums in the Philadelphia area in the fall and in Tampa, Florida in the fall. PTC is going to have folks at all of these research receptions and symposiums throughout the year. And so this will be another opportunity to provide you with more information about Vatiquinone and about how the programs are progressing, and keep everyone updated and continue to answer your terrific questions. And finally, Matt, thank you so much for joining us today, and kicking off the new year with really exciting news, that we could have a second approved therapy in Friedreich's ataxia before the end of the year, and a first approval in children. Thank you to you and your team and all the work you're doing.
Thank you, and we'll look forward to giving everyone updates. And again, we're incredibly grateful for the partnership with community over so many years.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.